Honoured to be here, and just thanks for the opportunity. So I'll just start this off. My name is Jane Last. I'm head of news for independent newspapers and independent.ie, and I'm also in charge of visuals. Gerry curses me every day, Gerry Mooney. So my job is I've been working in photographs since I was a picture editor of the Herald, which is in 2007, and I've been working in pictures and video in recent years. And as part of my job as head of news, I completely appreciate the importance of the power of a picture and how a picture can say so many other things that maybe copy can't do in the same way. In our panel today, we have Gerry Mooney. So Gerry is a staff photographer with Independent News and Media and has been with the company since 1999. He previously worked in the Daily Star newspaper from 1994 to 1998. He has worked as a press photographer right through the transition from the darkroom and processing of negative film and printing pictures to the era of instant transmission of images from live events directly from the camera to the picturesque. Over the years, he has received numerous PPAI awards for his work. PPAI is the Press Photographers Association of Ireland. He's also held the titles of Freelance Photographer of the Year, GA Photographer of the Year, and in 2017 he was named the Press Photographers Association of Ireland Press Photographer of the Year. So thanks for coming, Gerry. Next to Gerry we have Michele Galvin, who many of you will know. Michele is originally from Kennelly and later went to study graphics and photography in college in Cork. After qualifying for college, she started working in the photographic department of the Cork Examiner. She then returned to Killarney after getting married in 1979, and in 1980 she started working in the Kerry area, mainly East, South and Mid-Kerry, covering all aspects of life due to the fact that 80% of her work was for the regional papers. Michele covers news, arts, sports for the Kerry Man, and she tells me, I've gone from the old days of off the black and white, dark and lethargic to the digital world at the turn of the century. So she's a woman who's been through it all and seen it all. And then finally we have Gerry Kennelly again, who many of you will know. He's from Killorgan, County Kerry, started his career as a photographer with the Kerry Eye before setting up an independent news service picture agency which he ran for 15 years. Afterwards, Gerry set up Stockbite, a global stock photography agency, and under Gerry's management this went on to become the largest creator of stock photography for a number of years before Gerry sold it in 2006. He then moved into the area of technology and set up Tweak, a design technology company. In 2010, Gerry became involved in the Junior Entrepreneur Programme, an all-island programme in which 50,000 school children have started their own classroom businesses. Many of you probably have heard of that programme. It's a great success. And just last month, Gerry was announced as chairman of the News Brand's Journalism Awards for 2018. So he is a very, very busy man. I'm going to ask a series of questions. They're more than happy to discuss the answers, and if any of you have any questions at all, please feel free to ask. Thank you. Okay, so before I started, when I was doing some work on this panel over the weekend, I asked the three guys to come back to me with their favourite images that they've taken over the years. So I'm hoping this sample will work. Just tell us if it does. Oh, it will. So Gerry, I know this is actually Gerry's submission for the PPAI 2017 when he was named Press Photographer of the Year. So Gerry, you might just tell us the story behind that picture there.
This picture was from the Easter celebrations of 2016, which was to obviously celebrate 100 years. And I was asked to my brief on the day was to cover the event and try and do something a little bit different. And I found myself, in this job you can find yourself in strange places, and this day I found myself on the roof of Cleary's with the ERU and people looking over the whole event from afar, away from the obvious locations. And as the event moved on and everyone got kind of comfortable with each other, we started kind of moving along the routes along Hall Street, and this battalion were coming down. And I wanted to try and get something that encapsulated the whole ceremony, and these guys were coming down. But that picture was actually shot from O'Connell. They're on O'Connell Bridge, and I'm basically at Cleary's. But I shot into it. The picture was actually shot vertically and then turned to give. It was presented that way. So they were actually walking sort of down. But I wanted to get, because there was so much preparation from everybody, from the state to the people involved to the people on the street. It was a celebration, and I wanted one image that was going to bring it together, and it worked. Sometimes, you know, you just try things and they don't work. This one unfortunately worked, and everybody seemed to like that picture. Yeah, I'm happy with that.
when you were, I think you had a windshield on you and you were braving the elements and you were lying down on top of Cleary's department store for I think 4 or 5 hours. I think that's what you were telling me at the time.
Yeah.
But how many pictures would you have taken that day, and how many would you have sent in, and again how many would have been published?
There was I don't know how many hundred of pictures were taken because there were so many different aspects to the event that day. We had the official ceremony and reading of the proclamation, the marching bands, formations. You had the flight past by the airport. I was trying to, every time I was looking at something, I would see something obvious and say, I'm not going to shoot it that way. I wanted to try and shoot something that had something different to bring it either a broader kind of look at the whole event rather than kind of from the prescribed places. But you're kind of moving around and you have an idea what's happening, but until it happens, you don't know what's going to happen. So you have to be ready for basically everything. Even down to when the flight past happens, you know what's going to happen, but you don't really know. You have to be very, very quick in your judgment. Unfortunately, like the following day, there was the supplement made, and there was a good number of the images used well in the paper the following day, and I got a massive reaction. So it's lovely when you see the pictures being used and get a reaction like that, you know.
Okay, and this was the second one you actually wanted to discuss as well. So can you just tell us when this was taken and?
Yeah, this is up in Farmley. I'm growing up in the 80s. There was you were conscious of the division between North and South and Catholic and Protestant. And the job that I'm in, I love my job, and you're very fortunate sometimes to witness history. And this was a moment that I remember taking it, saying that's just, you're witnessing things happening in front of you. And I just, there's something about the expression between the two men and the hands and everything that it's just, it was the moment that they came together. And you could hear, we were opposite the main entrance to the family, and you could hear Ian Paisley walking up, and he was, you know, in his big, broad northern accent. And just before he said let me give this man a grip. And that was, it just sort of summed up how the whole, the piece was moving on, and a new generation of Ireland in terms of relations North and South was, I felt in that picture.
I understand you were in Washington with Enda Kenny for his last St. Patrick's Day visit. It was probably it was definitely the first visit of an Irish Taoiseach to meet with Donald Trump as well. So how was that?
Yeah, that was, like, again, we get very kind of caught up in what we do. As photographers, when you start out, it's kind of, it takes you in, and then you just kind of develop into your surroundings. You suddenly find yourself sometimes in these places, and I ended up standing outside the West Wing of the White House, and you're kind of standing there looking at your surroundings, and you're kind of going, it's a privilege to be here. And then this kind of aura kind of comes around, and Lechman Trump is literally there, and he's this big man, the world figure.
Does he have small hands?
Yeah, but when you suddenly realise he's there, you just kind of, you have to just kind of appreciate where you are and your surroundings, and then obviously when you see Enda and the friendly faces of his team around you, it kind of works. And when you're the only Irish kind of photographer there, in amongst all the American guys, it's somewhat strange, and then you find yourself, and it's bizarre. Like we talk about moving pictures. That's the big thing for us, is move. Like, you can have the best picture, you know, possible, but the best picture is only good when it's out there. It's no good having the best picture in your camera. And I'd say now this morning, every single person here, at some stage, I'm sure you all have a mobile phone, and 95% you have a smartphone. And I hazard a guess that a lot of you looked at maybe news feeds, or, you know, maybe looked at the Independent website or journal, or some, you know, you looked at some sort of news this morning, and in that was pictures. Like, it's up to us to see a moment, because when I started in the job, it was all about deadlines. You know, there was times in your head, like when we started in the start, like you had a first edition, then you had a second edition. That was about 9 o'clock in the evening, and then 11 o'clock. Then when I went into Abbey Street, you had the Herald, which the first one was off at 9:30 in the morning, then it was 11, 12:30, and then 2:30 in the afternoon was the 4 editions of the paper. And you had these times in your head, like you could go to an event in the Shelbourne Hotel, and you know, a lunchtime event, a social event, and you take a picture and you get back to the office, print it, get it down onto the pitch desk and into the paper, and like the paper would be on the street for the event, people coming out, and that was a huge achievement. But the deadline from then has changed to now. That there's no such thing as a deadline. The deadline is now. So what we do now is when we're at events such as Trump Meet in Kenny, which is a massive thing, we have the dongles on the side of the camera which transmit the picture instantly. So I would ring the picture desk and you know we'd say, look, I'm here. This is what's going to happen. Expect such and such in a few minutes. And because the reporters are on the phone, they're tweeting away straight away. So it's live news. So you have to move the picture. So like when you're at an event like the White House, as well as taking in the event itself, you have to move the picture because people want to see it now. Once it goes up, once there's a tweet or once the reporter says something's happened, we have to see the image, and it's all about moving it and just getting it out there. That's how it's changed.
Okay, so we might move on to, thanks for that, Gerry. We might move on to Michele Cooper Galvin now. I know that's not Michelle's picture, but I know, and we'll come back to that, I know Gerry Kennelly would like to talk about that. We might just talk about this one here, Michele, if that's okay.
Yeah, that was during one of the general elections, and there was talks of Paddy actually being nominated to go on the ticket for Fianna Fáil and that, and that was coming just down Main Street, and somebody on the right hand side, there's a shop there just on the right, and they had a football up in the window with a Kerry jersey and all that, and somebody from the shop came out and gave the ball to Paddy or to Bertie, and the next thing Paddy tried to pull him off it, you know. That's basically what that's about.
It's a fantastic moment, like just like Bertie for an election campaign, like Bertie and Paddy seem to be having the time, like it's just joy, the joy in their faces, like the joy in the...
Oh yeah, he's actually, Paddy was there for the whole day. He travelled along with them, I'd say he was there for the crack more than whatever, you know, more than the election, really, being honest. But unlike Gerry here on my right, Gerry's, my world is a lot slower, I suppose, really, unless it's Tuesday. Our publication comes out on Wednesday morning, and unless something major happens on a Tuesday, my world is much slower. I download every kind of Saturday or Sunday morning or Sunday night. I would be covering a lot of functions in any one day. I will go from maybe something on the schools to something on in score and something on in a function and maybe a presentation of a jersey to someone or a presentation of a cheque to someone. Mine is very provincial, very local, and that's what...
As important as national.
Yes,
down to
yes.
the region, like, don't do yourself down here either, Michele, you know, it's very, very important.
So, for the likes of the Kerryman now would say, and Kerry's out, we are a vehicle for the locals. They need us. If they collect money for any charity, they need us to go out and take their photograph. And I know the editors they hate to see the big cheque in front of the photograph, but it's important for the local people when they collect money that they're actually seen to hand it over. That type of thing, you know. Obviously then the county leagues and the football and the hurling. Now I don't do much hurling, but I would be, like, I could cover anything up to maybe 4 to 6 matches every weekend and that would be going, and then maybe 3 matches starting at 2:30. Which is...
When's your day off? If you're doing matches at the weekend?
A very good question.
Do you have a day off?
Well, technically Wednesday is my day off.
That's a day after publication, yeah.
But, you know, sometimes I might be going to Cork. I have a daughter working in Cork, so sometimes I go off to Cork. She's primary teacher, so we'd have maybe dinner on a Wednesday evening or something. Or my husband works in London, so I try to get off on a Tuesday and come back on a Thursday early Thursday morning. I have a daughter living in Dublin, and she's married with a little fella, 6 years old, so Dermot would fly to Dublin, and I would meet him on Tuesday night in the airport, and I'd drop him back Thursday morning in the airport, and then I'd get straight down. And if there was a job at 10 o'clock in Kennelly, I would be there.
I don't know how you could say here in Scotland that your working life is slower. I'm exhausted listening to you.
It works, you know. We hope, you know. I'm very lucky too, you know. We're a very small community here in Kerry, really. The press and media, very small community. All my colleagues that I work with, you know, in the Kerryman, but also on the ground with other photographers. We have a very good way with us, you know. We're all working together, and you know, even like Dominic there now can ratify that. I have Mike Brosnan now in my area, and he's marvellous, a great guy, you know. And it's very easy then if you're going into functions and that. It's very, you have to be smart to get in there and get out of there, because you have another 2 or 3 after, you know.
That's great. Gerry, do you mind if I bring us back to this picture here? Now I know none of you guys took, but myself and Gerry Kennelly, we were talking about this picture, and I'm just afraid we'll lose it now if we go into the slideshow. But the reason why we wanted to discuss this was that we're talking about the evolving technology in photography. And this picture, many of you might recognise, it was taken at the Regency Hotel by a photographer for independent newspapers. And interestingly, it was a picture that he got on his iPhone. So Gerry was aware of that. So I just wanted to talk, just before we lost that picture into the slideshow, you might just give us a few words on it.
This is a defining moment. In fact, I think it's a really important picture legally in terms of the court case, in terms of the criminal convictions and so on. But I mean, that's the picture of the gunmen going into the Regency Hotel, where mayhem sort of blew up afterwards. But I mean, talk about bottle. I mean, you know, my dad used to have a saying that, you know, you're as good as you are on the big story on the big day, and that's it. That's somebody actually manning up to the job to say, right, well, these guys are armed, but I'm still going to get the picture. And it just took a lot of guts, and it was just, you know, it doesn't matter what camera you take it on. The bottom line doesn't matter whether doesn't have to be perfectly sharp, but it's a news moment, and it's superbly captured, and that's a world beater. It's probably the best spot news picture taken in Ireland in the past decade, I would say. You know,
when you look at like, we all know what happened, but when you look at the picture, like, look at the content of that picture, it's a hotel in Dublin, 2 guys dressed up as guards, walking in with AK-47s, like, to cause mayhem. It's just, like, when you strip the picture back and look at what's going on in it, it's crazy. And speaking to my colleague about this picture, like, it's how it was done. There's some days, you know, when you just can't be a photographer, but you have to still get the picture, and it goes for this, it goes for other events. Like, it goes back to the appetite. There's just, you have to keep feeding the machine. But to do that picture, like, it's, you know, if you saw that in Holland or London or something, you think it's nuts. But like, this is Dublin, and this is real, and this is you know, that's what's going on. And that's, like, people form opinions of news stories through the writers, the words, but to actually see it and contextualise what's going on, that's, you know, yeah.
I think there's, certainly when I was working in press photography, I mean, I found that, you know, when you're working on a job and you're going through the moments, no more than Michele's wonderful moment just back there. I mean, she's maybe working that job for an hour and a half, and there's a defining moment, and it happens in a millisecond, and then it's gone. So it's up to you to capture it, and you've got to see it. I mean, certainly when I was working, I could visualise it. You know, have I got a front page lead, or have I got a page 3 lead tomorrow? Have I actually defined that moment? And that's really what it's all about as a photographer. You've got to see it. What you're doing. There'll be 1 or 2 images maybe that your work will be represented in the next day's paper or online now. So you have to actually see the picture on the page or on the online newspaper or whatever else. And that's really important. That you almost have. You shoot so much with digital now. It's more important than ever to actually just see that moment and be able to self-edit, because, you know, the most you can send back is 1 or 2 pictures, and you've got to make sure that the good ones get used.
Yeah, like, when you're at a live event, as Gerry says, it's all about, you have to be very, very critical of your own work, and to be able to make a decision. But it's to see the event for what it is, be it news, be it sport, whatever. And I go back to a couple of weeks ago when we had the fortune of the Grand Slam. I was in Twickenham to cover it. although you're in Twickenham and people say, oh, it's great, you know, you're going to Twickenham, you're just on the go to get the picture. And if the try doesn't happen in front of you or whatever, you're just constantly trying to taste the image. And like, you look at the scoreboard, like, people are saying, oh, you're at the match. I don't know how many times we've been at matches, like GAA, soccer, rugby, and you kind of go, who's winning this thing? And you haven't, because you're just so caught up in watching the play and watching the images and getting the images gone that you don't even know the score of the match.
I should add the last few images that we were flicking through are actually Michele Cooper Galvin's. Yeah, that was actually one of my favourites. I know it's one of Michelle's. So if you just want to tell us really briefly just the story behind that image there.
Oh yeah. Mary McAleese, President Mary, was around Kennelly doing a number of assignments, and she was leaving St Brendan's College, and to keep up with her, I slipped in behind her own car, first of all, in front of her detectives, who weren't pleased, but anyway. We drove along the bypass road, and instead of going straight for where they were supposed to be going, they did a right turn on around the roundabout in the top of Kennelly, and I was saying, where the hell are these guys going? So I kept going with them anyway, and they turned into the local community hospital. I walked in the door anyway, breezed in, and I knew the matron, so I said, I don't know whether I'm supposed to be here, but I'm going to stick here with you, you know. And she said, no problem. So went into the recreational place and we chatted to all the people there. But there was a number of people in the actual home that could not, that were bedridden, they couldn't get up go into the recreation. So Mary said, look, will I go down? Would I like to meet them? Oh, that'd be lovely. So down we went anyway. So this lady's family, who I knew, I said to them, do you want me to go down? And they said, yeah, that'd be great, you know, great. I said, fine, so I went down anyway. So Hannah was sound asleep anyway, and the matron who was on the left of the photograph was calling Hannah, saying, Hannah, the president is here to say hello to her. And Hannah anyway was still asleep, so anyway she tried the second time, and the next thing Hannah opened her eyes anyway, and Kay said to her, Hannah, the president is here to say hello to you. And Mary McAleese was leaning down, you see, the next thing, she looked up, whatever way she looked up, she must have seen Martin, and she said, oh, Deb! and I was saying, don't think so. But anyway, as quick as a flash, see what the fun, but as quick as a flash, Mary pulled Martin, and she just winked at him, and Martin went down. He said, how are you, Hannah? And you want to smile across her face, you were delighted with him. So that's the story behind that little
Hannah smiled Gerry, as I said, you're a very busy man. I don't know whether I have any of your images on this. Is there? Okay.
I know it's
Again. It's yours as well. Wow.
I think we actually have to be
That's a deep shot.
That was behind the little place.
That's Gerry's. Okay, Gerry. That's Michelle's as well.
Actually, that photograph, actually, Dominic is starting to smile. When that did quite well, it was night, you know, it was kind of got good reaction, we'll say. And the gentleman himself wasn't pleased, and he rang me one day, and Jack O'Connor, and he rang me one day, and he was giving out stink to me about the photograph. And what I did and what I made and don't know what, and the next thing anyway, he says, and you made me look like an idiot. And I said, I made you look like one. So for about 3 years we didn't talk.
Yeah, this is myself and a bunch of other photographers involved in the Press Photographers Association. Have done a number of gigs abroad in India and in Africa and in Haiti and places. And this is a gig. The first picture, Jen, if you would just roll back for a second. The first picture was this was in Addis Ababa, and the street children that night. There's a really sort of difficult to imagine that young kids of 10, 11 and 12 are living on their own on the street at night, and we did an interview to an interpreter as well for the sort of a little video thing that we did. But I mean, just I thought this was such a sad image, and you know, people will be complaining here in Ireland about how tough life is. That's tough, you know, and it literally broke my heart to talk to that young chap, and it's everywhere in that city. And you know, Addis Ababa is quite a modern city. Lots of diplomats live there. It's very wealthy in many ways, and yet at the same time you have these children living on their own in the street, wide open to all sorts of corruption. And it's I think it's on his face. It's such a sad picture.
And was the next one taken in Addis Ababa as well?
No, that was taken up country and in Ethiopia, in the north, and this is a lot of the mothers walk 20 and 30 miles to bring their children to one of these sort of centres that are set up by goals, and this child wouldn't have lasted another day or two. But I mean, in 10 days after that picture was taken, the child actually regained strength, and it was a success story. But I mean, you know, again, we live in such a privileged world. You really have to. I think you have to focus in on the detail to say, right, well, look, that's how the rest of the world lives. In Ethiopia, people survive on somewhere between $1 and $2 a day. There's a chap who used to run Goal in Ethiopia called John Rinn. He was a social worker in Dublin, and he was just talking about the comparison of life in Ethiopia versus Ireland. And he said, look, there are homes in Dublin that he dealt with that cost the state €500,000 or €1 million a year between people in prison and lots of services and lots of different things. And he said, here we are, people. You know, he said, I've never met a depressed person yet in Ethiopia, and they have nothing. You know, it was part of a series. We did a number of calendars and things over various years, and to allow Goal to tell the stories in some detail. There were a lot of mostly positive images, but occasionally people had to sort of see the reality of it all.
Okay, so what we might do now, if this is okay, Phil, we might just play the images maybe as a slideshow just in the background as we're talking, if that's okay. Or is there another one you want to do?
There's one other one that I just like this. Maybe after that there's one more. There's a picture spread by my mother taken in 1969 when Charles de Gaulle and his wife came to Sneem, and there were no cameras allowed in the church, and she took a picture, was immediately arrested, and refused to hand over the film, and you know, to get a spread in Parry match was pretty good. She sold it exclusively country by country. But I mean, again, that was the defining news moment of that day, and I suppose because of the fact that there was big news in France, because de Gaulle was in Kerry during the riots in Paris, and he was hot property, and that was the best picture of the day, and that's really what it's all about. I mean, she knew the moment that she released the shutter at an eighth of a second that was going to be a great picture, and it worked. It wasn't technically perfect, but again, she had the news sense to understand the value of it.
I also remember at that time that when she took that, she couldn't look at the back of her camera to see what she had.
Oh, yes.
She had to fly with one wing, taking that photograph, you know.
Well, I remember, you know, when I was training under my mum and dad, you know, I came back from my job one day and my film was in the tank, and my dad asked me, he said, Gerry, what are the pictures like? And I said they're actually great, and I hadn't seen the film yet. He said, no, now you've got it. That's it. The minute you release the shutter, you know you have it. That's it took me a while.
Okay, thanks, Gerry. Does anybody have any questions here for our three photographers? Are we ready to power on? Yeah. Okay, so I have some questions here anyway, and again, we could more than happy to take questions from the audience as well. So, or any thoughts or any observations would be great as well. So, as we were discussing, like the name of this panel is "A Picture Paints 1,000 Words." But does that still apply in the digital and mobile age today? Gerry, I might go to you first, given your background in tech.
Yeah, I think it's more important than ever. I mean, it's very hard for us to consume video images, to consume a single moment from them, and to define it. I think our mind remembers things in still images, and you can focus on something on a page or on a screen, and you know, absolutely more important than ever to see real stories. I mean, the pictures from the guys there and my own. I mean, that's what people remember, and that image stays in your mind if it's good enough. and I think it's a really important part of journalism. And you know, the fact that photographers are almost the first people to record history. Most journalists aren't at the cold front in terms of where the story is happening now. The photographers represent the sort of the media really to a great extent, and they're the ones who are capturing history, and they're witnesses to it. So I think it's just really important that lives on, that's given the space. Unfortunately, I think there isn't the space in today's papers to actually represent the work properly. It's almost, I think photography is almost a wasted resource to a great extent in this. You know, it needs more space.
Do you think digital would help in that regard? Like you're saying there, like there might be less pagination in print titles today, but again, if there's a website that the same company own, that you know that the whole photographer's work maybe
exactly. I mean, like the Guardian do quite a good job on it, and the New York Times do quite a good job of sort of giving the impact of that work. And sometimes, you know, you have the luxury of having a series of pictures that tell a story, and I think, you know, photographers need that. You need to get your work showcased to get a reaction to it, and I think that the readers and the public deserve to see more than just the one picture, because it becomes quite often it ends up as the same agency picture gets used that represents everything, and there's nothing different about it, and it's very hard for the sort of subtlety and a deeper story to be told with pictures.
Michele, I might move on to you there. Do you think maybe the digital and mobile revolution, maybe it's made the photographer's role stronger, do you think? Or do you think maybe photography is losing out because of digital? Or
Okay, but I do believe that if you show somebody a good black and white, people still go, oh, that's lovely, I like that.
So you would argue that it doesn't matter whether the picture appears in print,
You know,
or in digital?
No,
mobile.
I think I still think the black and white. The digital age, it has made, now the editors think they should have the photograph before you even take it.
True.
Right? So, you know...
I can't say that, that's my boss.
Well, they do. I'd say it for you anyway. But if my boss is here, I'd say it to him, and he knows that. No, I just think that it has made it a lot faster. It has, like, we don't have to go home anymore and go into dark rooms and all that kind of thing, and we don't have to rush for the local bus with a brown envelope with photographs in it to get to Tralee and all that kind of thing. But I suppose it has created its own problems, as we heard earlier on, with images not being used properly and images being used that shouldn't be used. And I have a big thing about that, because I know, just way off the subject a slight bit, going into local schools or going into any local situation, even functions or anything like that, before I take a photograph of a child, I must find that parent and say, is it okay if I take this photograph here? Oh yeah, that's fine.
And we'll be coming back to
You know,
that
so
later on.
like-
Yeah.
So
No, yeah.
that's where the digital, you know, I think there's problems with this as well as we could have.
That's grand. And Gerry, just very quickly, what's your thought on this? Like, does a picture still paint 1,000 words in
Yeah.
the age of...
Without a doubt, like the picture is the picture is the as I say, it's the moment that people remember, and how that picture is captured is, you know, it's always going to change. And like, go back to the 1820s when photography started, like, you know what I mean, and people say with the selfies, and like the first selfie was done in the 1830s, and a man stood in front of a camera for, I think it was 6 or 7 minutes, that was the first portrait. So it's how the image is taken, and I don't mean this in a smart way, but like when you look at the digital revolution, in terms of how it's progressing, how quickly it's progressing, like everybody here that has a smartphone has a camera and the ability to capture an image, and within that smartphone that you have in your pocket that you're sending texts or Viber messages or whatever, YouTube, like, is a processor that's a lot stronger than the first generation of digital cameras. And the digital camera, when it first came out in the Independent, I think it was £25,000 for the camera body, with no lens, no nothing, just a body. And that camera came with a roster. We had to, you know, find who was, if you were the late man, you had to link up with the early man to make sure he had or leave it somewhere for it. But everybody now has the ability to capture an image, and a very good image as well. But it's still, it's having the technology in your pocket, but it's the ability to use it. It's like the guys going out cycling this morning around Kerry, like they have the best bikes and the whole lot, but it doesn't mean they can go and cycle a Tour de France. Like it's using the tools to your own ability, and I think the role of the photographer and the eye of the photographer and the sense of the photographer. Like we go into news events, and like some of them, like some of the jobs we do are lovely, and some of them are very, very sensitive. And when I take trainees with me, the first thing I say to them is, look, you've come out of college now and you're out into the real world. Nobody's going to tell you when you go into it. Like we deal with grief a lot, and that's a tricky subject we have to deal with, because stories are very sensitive. Nobody tells you when to say you're a photographer, when to even produce a camera, and like you can see the cameras, they're not exactly small. When to even suggest taking a picture, and when you take the picture, how you're going to take the picture, because you're dealing with people's grief. But at the end of the day, that grief is 9 times out of 10, it's not gratuitous. It's because the story is in the national interest, and people are talking about it. We have to capture the image, and they're using the digital to do that.
Would you be on the same level as Michele? Like Michele made the point, like once you have the strength of the photograph, whether it appears in print or digital platform, it doesn't really matter. Just once the picture's out there.
Once the picture's out there,
okay, and the right photograph, regardless of the platform, still paints it.
Without a doubt, yeah.
Okay.
Like once the pictures are subjective,
okay.
And people will always make up their own mind.
Okay, great. Just while we're on digital, I'm just going to bring us down to a question I have further down the list, but I think it's kind of relevant to this area. Jay, can you might be able to tell me, just with your background, is copyright or theft of your images now a bigger problem for photographers now than maybe it was 20 years ago?
I mean, it's certainly easier to knock off images than it was. I mean, there's technology that can help secure that, but I suppose overall, image creation has been commoditized hugely. I mean, you can get a contract for Getty for a daily paper probably for 50 grand a year. You've got 300 or 400 photographers running around the world at sports events, jumping in front of tanks and whatever else for really, really, really low cost. So that's, I mean, news pictures almost have...
Have you ever had an image taken, like that you've taken and somebody else
has
taken?
We had quite a bit of it in stock by then. We enforced it pretty hard when we found the culprits, but and you know, our discs used to get sort of copied and ripped off in China and that sort of thing. But I mean, look, I think the problem is that photography is being sold too cheap, which prevents good work being done. And you know, if a national paper is for 50 or 60 grand a year can get a service from that many photographers, then it just makes the work very cheap. It makes it hard to invest invest in really good photojournalism. It just does, to do the job properly, does take time. It's highly skilled. I mean, a photographer today is going to be carrying maybe 50 or 60 grand's worth of gear with him or her, and it's a job that takes time to do properly, and I don't think copyright is a huge issue.
You don't
because
think
the value of the images in themselves are really low commercially now. It's the truth.
Maybe Michele and Gerry, like just with your Michele, have you ever had an image taken from you online? And
I have.
Yeah. And what were you able to do? Anything?
I just sued them.
You sued them. You took them to court.
Mm.
And were you successful? Did you take them to
yes,
court?
I took.
They didn't know what they were taking on.
I took. Can I say what I took?
Yeah.
Well, that's just public knowledge anyway. I took Sean Kelly, MEP, and Gillian Macmillan. They published a photograph belonged to me, which they didn't have permission for. And when I was actually at the launch of the book. And
it was published in a book?
Yes.
Okay.
And I opened the book and I went, So I said nothing that night. I went away home and I rang Gillian Macmillan the following morning and asked the girl, could I speak to the editor? So she said he was too busy. So I said, if I was him now, I'd come on the phone to me. So eventually, anyway, he came on the phone. So he was very glib and he told me that I'd have to prove it. So, as Gerry will tell you, that now was a bit annoying to me. And so I sued him and they paid up in court.
have to go to those
Yeah,
lengths.
I have a big thing about copyright. I think, you know, these are images that are, you know, we have to purchase our cameras, which as a freelance, it's not easy at times. We go to the jobs, we use our head, we file. I mean, I have 40 years of, personally, I have 40 years of filing at home in a safe. And I mind them and I look after them. And they are my property. And, you know, I wouldn't go into somebody's house and take something out of their house and say, I don't know, I'll use that now for a while. You know, and I'll make a few bob. No, it's an actual item. It's belonged to the photographer. And copyright is sacrosanct as far as I'm concerned. And if you want it, you pay for it. And it's as simple as that.
And do you think issues regarding copyright on your work, do you think they've increased in recent years, like due to digital, maybe in the last 10 years?
I've only had 2 incidents, and that's it. And I think a lot of people now would kind of know that I would be, you know, and I did put down a marker. I had no problem putting down a marker. And I would still put down a marker, and I would, you know, if somebody crosses the line, yes, I would take them off. Because I really think that, you know, it's not good enough to use some. As Gerry said there, it's not. It doesn't cost the world. If anyone rang any one of us for an image to use it in. Now I have actually given my images for charity, for various things. But when it's a commercial product and you've a publishing house that's going to make money out of it, get over it, pay for it, and use it, and use your copyright notice on it. Now I have a situation at the moment which is I'm hot on the heels of somebody else that used an image belonging to me and took my copyright notice off it, took my name off it, so I'm actually hot on their heels at this present moment.
I look forward to reading about that. Gerry, have you had images take, I mean, your work and the work of your 6 colleagues in independent newspapers features quite extensively, on, not only just in the print titles but also in independent.ie, which millions of people go to. So have you had a case where, well not a case, but an instance where you're like, oh, that website just took my pick and did
Yes, I have had instances, and obviously, you know, we have to bring it to like yourself and the desk, that stuff, because like particularly with the website, like stuff is just so easy to save an image, and like I've had occasions where I'm sitting at home watching the telly, and actually go, Jesus, that's my picture, and you wouldn't know anything about it. And there has been cases in the past where you kind of go, you make a phone call or you go into the office following day and you say, that program last night had such and such a photograph, and they would have to follow up. The people just, there has been a case, you know, where people take images just and they disregard it's as Michele says, it's basically taking someone else's property and using it, so you do have to guard the stuff.
And do you think it's worse now than it might have been 10, 20 years ago?
It's certainly easier for people to get images.
Okay.
There is actually a good one. There was a bit of a sort of a strained relationship between the Star when Gerry Collin was the editor and my brother's newspaper, Kerry's Eye, and there was constantly lifting stuff. So my dad made a criminal complaint of theft against Gerry Collin, and the guards actually, Gerry was really surprised when the guards arrived to arrest him and invite him down to the station for questioning. And they've gotten over it because Gerry's now the editor of Kerry's Eye. He went to the dark side.
Okay, I might just start this question with you, Gerry Mooney. We were talking there just this week about the evolving, changing judgment calls in news photography and newsrooms, and I was saying that pictures that may have been acceptable enough to print maybe 5 or 10 years ago, not really acceptable now, not seen as acceptable now. And again, just Michele touched on there, you know, it's pictures of children. So, for example, I know where I work in independent newspapers, we stopped taking pictures of children at events like funerals, for example. Before, if children were in the pictures, we would have used the pictures. Now we actually go out of our way to avoid taking pictures of children. If children happen to run into the frame and we have to use the image, we will pixelate the face. But that's something that we've made a judgment call in recent years. I know that other outlets have followed the same thing, but that's just one example. Do you like? It seems to me that the judgment calls are kind of evolving.
Yeah,
all the time.
It's very, in the last couple of years, the sensitivity around children and minors in images, you have to be, it's such a sensitive subject. and particularly like at news events, I touched on earlier on about like covering, say, the likes of a funeral. Nobody likes to do, but like, you know, they have to be done, and it's part of a job. But like you're so conscious that like you're watching children, and if children are in the picture, like you try your utmost to avoid it, because it's really such a touchy subject. That people are very guarded. Like I've 2 kids myself, and if I'm out and I see someone taking pictures, I'm kind of going, you know, because you know the capabilities of a camera, and you're kind of going, what's he at, or what, you know, it's.
Or where's the picture going to
Yeah,
appear?
where's the
So,
picture
for
going to
example,
appear,
will it
yeah.
appear on a news
Yeah.
website, or will it be
just-
there forever?
Yeah,
Or
it's you have to be so careful with children, and rightly so. But like as I say, like the pictures that we would have taken, which was normal then, like say go back 10 years, like you pictured there, that was the way it was done. But there certainly would be pictures that would have been shot then that you just wouldn't go near now. You just couldn't.
I just wonder, is that not part of social media, where you've got to be so politically correct about everything? I mean, of course, nobody wants to see children anyway sort of abused in terms of photography. But I mean, if you think back to the JFK's kids at his funeral, I mean, does that mean that today that history can't be recorded in the same way? I mean, I think
it's evolving judgment call, and
I know, but is it not a kind of form of self-censorship by the media? Because, you know, the Twitter nutcases define the standard of everything. Does everything then become so anodyne that maybe I couldn't take that picture in Ethiopia to tell the story? I think that there's a real danger here to say, right, well, we're going to have news values, and and if the photographers stop taking it, you know, there may be instances where journalists, where editors may have to make a call. But the reality is, if photographers stop taking pictures that matter, then it all becomes blah, and their role becomes diminished, and society doesn't get the same kind of quality of photojournalism that it actually deserves. A photographer has to stick their neck out and do it, because people in the calm light of the day afterwards, editors can make those decisions. But I think it's really important those pictures are taken.
So, are you saying that we just have to be careful not to go too far in that particular? Because like Michele, you were saying there, like when you go to an event now, and if you see a child there, and it could be a book launch, but you have to be 100% certain that the parents are. Like you're almost getting to sign a slip or something like that, or...
No, I don't actually have to get them to sign a slip, but I have to actually find them and say, do you mind if I take the 2 children there with the lovely blue woolly jumpers and them? No. No, we don't. That's fine. But a colleague of mine in the Kerryman, formerly in the Kerryman, who's retired now, he took a photograph here in North Kerry in one of the he was passing a country school, and the kids were sitting on top of a wall, and he took the photograph, and this is before the digital age came in, and the editor, Seamus O'Connor, got a phone call from the school about who took the photograph of the kids without permission. Now that was even before the digital age, but I suppose, look, I agree with Gerry. I think it's very restrictive to kind of say no kids, you know, too far east is west. But
well, Gerry made the point there. If we did that, then we wouldn't have the pictures of JFK's
well,
children,
that was a hugely strong image, like,
yeah.
that, you know, and that was a fact. You know?
And all the serendipitous images that photographers get, I mean, that's part of photojournalism. And the reality is, if you go to cave, the whole world is full of nutcases on social media now. And if everything brings it down to the standard that is to be passable by the nuttiest person who's tweeting, then that just makes that demolishes the achievements that photojournalists and the contribution they can make. So I think it's really important to make a stand, and on the day let editors decide, but photographers should always shoot. If you start self-censoring, it's a joke. I mean, in the Junior Entrepreneur Programme, we have to be really careful. The images and the videos are used on television and websites and in newspapers, but we will not shoot now unless because they're endorsing our programme effectively, and it's more than the normal editorial situation. We have a model release signed by every parent, and if there's no model release, we don't shoot. Because we've got to cover ourselves, because again, that 1% of nutcases who will attack us on the basis of an innocent picture, you know.
Okay, I've got the organisers tapping their watches at me.
Any
questions?
The book, sorry, your father's book, I mean, the record of children's death is magnificent. You wouldn't know, you know.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, the pictures in the Kennelly archive, they couldn't be taken today. If we apply that standard, then you can't have photojournalism anymore. And photojournalism isn't always posed pictures. For the most part, photographers have to be able to roam in the same way that all the great documentary photographers are able to roam freely and take serendipitous pictures. I mean, you wipe out, in the history of photojournalism, you wipe out most of the great pictures, because if you have to start asking for permission, it turns you into some kind of a robot, and it doesn't serve us well.
And it's a beautiful historical history of Kerry and all over, you know, the kids in Gerry go to school, the different outfits that they wore. It's magic, and you can pick it up any time and read it.
Yeah.
And, you know, as you say, if you were to go and get permission every time, there wouldn't be any record of anything.
Yeah, it wouldn't work, yeah.
It wouldn't work, but then I suppose there are some parents out there who would object to their children featuring in photographs, and
aspect
you know,
as
and
well,
that's,
you know.
yeah, that's what we're.
Things can be done tastefully as well as.
Oh, exactly,
you know.
yeah. Is there any other questions from the floor that anybody would like to take?
I just wanted to ask Gerry,
Jerry,
actually,
Jerry.
yeah, no, actually ask all of you. So, ethics are constantly evolving in media, and one of them is privacy. And we've even had a decision in the European Court of Human Rights on people being entitled to privacy even when they're in public spaces. So has the ethics changed as the technology has changed? Like, so in France, for example, you can photograph a crowd, but you can't photograph that person's image. So this whole kind of the being consented to be photographed even in a public space, are there other sort of ethical challenges that maybe the digital has kind of accelerated?
I'm not sure that it's really anything to do with digital. I mean, it's just to do with the fact that I suppose people have a voice, and you know, they probably, you know, when I was working in press photography, I mean, the amount of times I took a box outside courts and other places where it was sensitive. Nobody wants you there on a big day. Nobody. I mean, if you were to work to instruction to create good pictures, then you're going to produce rubbish. So the reality is, you know, I mean, whatever about legislation, the reality is, I mean, you've just got to stick your neck out and take the picture, and take the best picture that you can take on the day. And I think it's really a job for editors and people after the fact to decide whether or not we can publish this. But I mean, you know, it becomes the lowest common denominator. The reality is, people are giving out now because they have a forum to do it in social media, and you can be blasted out of it for almost nothing. And you know, there's, you know, 10% of people are mad, and 1% of people are bad. So the 1% are always going to break their chops.
Can I just play devil's advocate there? Like we're saying, like people do actually have a forum to give out about that. Though. Do you not think that people have a right to reply, like the subjects of photographs that people do have, say, you know, I am annoyed that my picture's taken.
Sure they can. But I mean, I suppose the reality is, you know, if you're in a place where photography is happening, I think that, you know, look at the work of Austin Finn, for example. I mean, an incredible body of work of life in Dublin for 30 or 40 years. I mean, a superb body of work of photographing people on the street and whatever else. And yeah, it'd probably be a lot more difficult to do it today. But I mean, that's what we have to give up. If we really want, you know, if we really want to be picture perfect for every gobshite on Twitter, then you give that up. And I don't think we should give that up. I think it's an important part of society and the way life is captured.
Can I just say, like, I just know just from working on the picture, I was like, there's one thing that we'd always be checking with photographers, did you take that picture on a public road?
Yes.
And then the photographer's like, I don't know. It's like, well, you better get some maps and talk to someone in the city council, because if that's not on, like, if it's on a private, like, the road might look public, but it might not. So that's just something that we, like, it's actually one thing that's always popped up in the last few years. Like, did you take that? And it wasn't a public road. Was it a private road? Were you in the driveway by a meter? Were you, you know? And if that's the case, we actually have had some great photographs over the years of personalities who are in the headlines for one thing or another, but we've had to spike them because they weren't taken from public space. And that wasn't anything done on purpose. That was a photographer trying to get the best thing, but they found the laneway, which was maybe 100 metres outside their home, is part of their land. And even though we thought it was public, it wasn't. And then if we were to publish that photograph and they knew it was taken on a private laneway, then we're on the hook for, you know, so we just have to be mindful of that. Jerry, is there anything you might want to say?
Yeah, just on that, like, in terms of the privacy issue, like, it's one, the way I kind of look at it and deal with it, and there's kind of, it's kind of, that subject has got its own legs in the last couple of years, and I think it's just like a snowball, it just keeps going. But where do you say stop? But the rule of thumb I have in my head, what I use for this, and yeah, you do have to be sensitive to what you're photographing. But as Jane said, one of the things I do is I make sure I'm standing in a public place. And if I'm standing in a public place and I have a camera, that's because I have a camera, that's grand. But if I'm standing in a public place, you could be there, anybody could be there standing looking at what I'm looking at. I'm not in a private area. Anybody in this room could be standing in the spot where I am. And the fact that I recorded what I could see in a public place, to me, that's fair game. And you can't like, as Gerry says, like, you have to draw the line somewhere. And if something's in a private place, in a private property, that's exactly what it is. It's private. But if you're on the street and and you can visibly see it from the street, or it's happening on the street, well, then that's it. And like, if it's news, that has to be covered. Like, you're documenting news. Like, it's news. Like, look at the letters NEW. It's new. It's happening. It has to be recorded. And what's commonplace now is history in a couple of years' time. But you have to. You can't have social censorship. Like, you have to use your head. But as I say, my thing is, if I'm standing on the street out there and something happens, the fact that I'm there with a camera, you could be standing beside me and you could witness it as well. The fact that it's just recorded.
Okay, I have to wrap this up, but Michele, I'll give you the final word on this if you want to add anything to Gerald's question, or are you okay?
No, basically, I'd be very same as Gerry here. If I'm on a public road or a public place, I'll take the photograph, and we'll take the consequences afterwards, or we'll just get the editor's call, as Gerry said, it's the editor's call. But I won't stop because I'm on a double yellow line or something.
Take the consequences or take the box,
That's grand. I'd like to thank our panel, Gerry, Mooney, Michele, Cooper, Galvin, and Gerry.